The cracked cup. A young man once visited an old tea master. As they sat together quietly, the old man poured tea into 2 cups. One cup was flawless. The other had a long crack running down its side. The young man frowned. "Why keep the broken cup?" he asked. "It's damaged." The old man smiled and said, "Watch carefully." He poured tea into both cups. The flawless cup held everything perfectly, but the cracked cup slowly leaked drops of tea onto the ground beside it. The young man shook his head. "It's useless." The old man stood and pointed outside. Along the path beside the house, beautiful flowers were blooming. The cracked cup watered them every day. The young man stood silently, and the old man said, "Many people hate their scars, their failures, their weaknesses, without realizing those struggles may be helping others grow." Stoicism does not teach perfection. It teaches acceptance. Pause. Every person carries cracks, pain, regret, loss, mistakes. But wisdom comes when you stop hiding them and start learning from them. As Epictetus once said, "Difficulties show what men are." Your scars do not make you worthless. Sometimes, they become the reason something beautiful grows. Even cracked cups still have purpose. Modern Stoic mind. The Emperor and the Skull. One evening, a young Roman officer visited an old Stoic teacher. The officer was troubled. Not by war, not by politics, not by wealth, but by one thing: death. "I cannot stop thinking about it," he confessed. "One day I will die. Everyone I love will die. Everything I build will disappear." The old Stoic listened quietly, then stood and motioned for the young man to follow. They walked through the city until they reached a silent cemetery outside the walls of Rome. The moon hung low above the graves. The air was still. The officer felt uncomfortable. "Why have you brought me here?" The old man knelt beside an ancient grave and carefully lifted a weathered skull from the earth. Holding it in his hands, he asked, "Who was this man?" The officer shook his head. "I don't know." "Was he rich?" "I don't know." "Powerful?" "I don't know." "Famous?" "I don't know." The old Stoic nodded. "Exactly." He gently placed the skull back upon the stone. Every emperor, every warrior, every merchant, every king, every slave, eventually arrives here. The young officer stared at the rows of graves stretching into the darkness. For the first time, he understood. Death did not care about status. It did not care about money. It did not care about titles. Death treated everyone equally. The old Stoic sat beside him and said, "Most people fear death because they believe it steals life from them. But death gives life value. If you had endless years, you would waste them. Because time only becomes precious when it is limited." The young officer listened carefully. The fear inside him slowly began to change. The Stoic continued, "Death is not the enemy. A wasted life is. The wind moved quietly through the cemetery. Then the old man said, "Every morning, remember that your time is limited. Not so you become fearful, but so you become grateful. Grateful for another sunrise, another conversation, another opportunity to do good, another chance to live with virtue." As Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." The officer lowered his head. For years he had feared death. Now he saw it differently. Death was not standing at the end of life waiting to take everything away. It was standing beside life every day, reminding him to use his time wisely. The moonlight shone across the silent graves, and for the first time in many years, the officer felt peaceful. Because he understood something most people never do. We do not control how long we live, but we do control how we live. The Stoics did not obsess over death. They remembered it. Because remembering death teaches us how to live. Do not fear the end. Fear never truly beginning. Modern Stoic mind. The man who carried the fire. A traveler once crossed a frozen land during the middle of winter. The wind was brutal. Snow covered the roads, and every step became harder than the last. But despite the cold, the traveler carried a small lantern with a living flame inside. People along the road laughed at him. "That tiny fire won't save you from this storm." The traveler simply smiled and kept walking. Hour after hour, the storm grew worse. Many people turned back. Others sat down in defeat. But the traveler protected the flame carefully with both hands. Eventually, another freezing traveler approached him and asked, "How are you still going?" The man lifted the lantern and replied, "Because I protected this before I protected anything else." The flame was not just fire. It was hope, discipline, purpose, inner peace. Stoicism teaches that no matter how cold the world becomes, you must protect the fire within yourself. The world will try to extinguish it with negativity, hardship, distraction, anger, fear. But the Stoic protects their inner flame carefully, because once a person loses purpose, discipline, and self-control, they become lost in the storm. As Seneca once said, sometimes even to live is an act of courage. Strength is not always loud. Sometimes strength is simply continuing forward, while protecting the small fire inside you. Guard your flame. Modern Stoic mind. The king's empty cup. A powerful king once invited a Stoic monk to his palace. The king had everything: wealth, armies, power, gold beyond measure. Yet despite all of it, he was restless. That evening, the king asked the monk, "How can I finally feel peace?" The monk said nothing. Instead, he picked up the king's golden cup and began pouring tea into it. The cup filled quickly, but the monk kept pouring. Tea spilled over the sides, across the table, onto the floor. The king jumped to his feet. "Stop! The cup is already full." The monk smiled calmly. "And so is your mind." The room fell silent. The monk continued, "You fill your life with more wealth, more approval, more distraction, more noise, yet wonder why peace never starts. Yes. An overflowing mind cannot hold P. CE. Stoicism teaches Simplic. Iti. Not because success is wrong, but because endless desire creates endless suffer. Ing. Many people spend their entire lives chasing status, attention, possessions, validation, while neglecting calmness, wisdom, discipline, inner peace. As Seneca once said, it is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is Po. Or, peace does not arrive when you finally have everything. Ing. Peace arrives when you stop needing everything. Ing. Empty the cup. Modern Stoic mind. A traveler once asked a stonecutter, "How do you break something so strong?" The stonecutter smiled and struck the rock lightly with his hammer. Nothing happened. Again. Nothing. Again. Nothing. Then, on the 100th strike, the stone cracked in two. The traveler said, "So that final strike was the one that broke it." The stonecutter shook his head. "No. It was every strike before it." That is how discipline works. Most people quit because they do not see immediate results. They stop training, stop learning, stop improving. But Stoicism teaches patience. Every early morning, every difficult day, every silent sacrifice. It all matters. As Seneca once said, difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body. You may not see progress today, but every disciplined action is shaping who you become. Stay consistent. The storm does not break the stone. It reveals its strength. Modern Stoic mind. Don't forget to like and follow for more. The stone in the road. A tired traveler walked along a narrow road through the mountains. Halfway through his journey, he found a huge stone blocking the path. Angry and exhausted, he shouted, "Why does life always make things harder?" Instead of moving the stone, he sat beside it complaining for hours. As the sun began to set, an old traveler approached quietly. Without saying a word, the old man pushed against the stone. Slowly, it moved. Behind it was a small leather bag filled with gold coins. The younger traveler stared in disbelief, and the old man said, "Obstacles often hide the things we need most." Most people see difficulty as punishment. The Stoic sees difficulty as training. Hardship builds patience, discipline, resilience, wisdom. Without struggle, nothing strong is ever created. As Seneca once said, difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body. Every obstacle in your life can either stop you or shape you. The choice is yours. Push the stone. Modern Stoic mind. A student once asked a Stoic teacher why he never argued with people who insulted him. The teacher picked up a cup of water and held it still. "When the water is calm," he said, "it reflects everything clearly." Then he shook the cup violently. But when disturbed, nothing can be seen. The student watched the water settle back into silence. The teacher smiled and quoted Epictetus. "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." In today's world, people are constantly provoked. By opinions, by social media, by anger, by comparison. But not every comment deserves a response. Not every battle deserves your energy. A calm mind sees clearly. An emotional mind reacts blindly. Silence is not weakness. Self-control is power. Modern Stoic mind. The man who chased the horizon. A young man spent his entire life chasing happiness. He believed peace was always somewhere ahead of him. If I earn more money, I'll finally be happy. If people admire me, I'll finally feel enough. If I become successful, respected, important, then I'll feel peace. So he spent years chasing the horizon. He traveled from city to city, worked endlessly, collected wealth, built status, earned praise from strangers. Yet every night, when silence finally arrived, he still felt empty. The more he gained, the further peace seemed to move away from him. One evening, exhausted and frustrated, the man wandered deep into the mountains. There, sitting quietly beside a fire, was an old Stoic traveler. The old man looked calm, not because he owned much, but because he seemed to need very little. The young man sat beside him and asked, "How do I finally reach happiness?" The old traveler smiled faintly, then pointed toward the distant horizon. "Walk toward it," he said. Confused, the young man stood and walked for hours. But no matter how far he traveled, the horizon continued moving further away. By nightfall, angry and exhausted, he returned. "It's impossible," he snapped. "I can never reach it." The old man nodded calmly. "Exactly." The fire crackled softly between them. Then the old traveler said, "Most people spend their entire lives chasing peace the same way. They believe happiness exists in money, status, attention, possessions, or other people's approval. But peace cannot be chased. It must be created within." The young man stared silently into the fire. For the first time in years, he truly listened. The old traveler continued, "The world trains people to constantly want more. More success, more validation, more entertainment, more distraction. And because of this, many people never learn how to simply sit with themselves peacefully. They become addicted to movement, addicted to noise, addicted to chasing the next thing." But Stoicism teaches something very different. The Stoics believed peace does not come from controlling the world around you. It comes from controlling yourself. Your thoughts, your desires, your reactions, your impulses. Because when the mind is uncontrolled, nothing will ever feel like enough. As Seneca once said, "He who is contented is rich." Not the man with the most wealth, not the man with the most followers, not the man with the most applause, but the man who can sit peacefully with himself. The young man looked around the mountains, the cold air, the quiet fire, the silence of the night sky. And suddenly, for the first time in many years, he felt calm. Not because he had gained something new, but because he had stopped chasing. The old traveler smiled gently and said, "Peace begins the moment you stop running from yourself." Many people spend their lives searching everywhere for happiness, without realizing the thing they seek cannot be found externally. Because peace is not a destination, it is a way of living. The horizon will always move, but the Stoic learns to stand still. Stop chasing. Modern Stoic mind. The two wolves. A young man once asked an old Stoic warrior, "Why do I constantly feel at war with myself?" The warrior looked into the fire and replied, "Because inside every person, there are two wolves fighting. One wolf is anger, ego, laziness, impulse, fear. The other is discipline, patience, courage, focus, peace." The young man sat quietly before asking, "Which wolf wins?" The old warrior looked at him calmly and said, "The one you feed every day." Modern life constantly feeds the wrong wolf. Endless distractions, comfort, comparison, instant gratification. Stoicism teaches that every action shapes your character. Every time you stay disciplined, control your emotions, choose growth over comfort, you strengthen the better part of yourself. As Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." Your habits shape your mind. Your thoughts shape your future. Feed discipline. Feed peace. Feed strength. Modern Stoic mind. The archer. A young student once asked an old Stoic teacher, "How do I stop fearing failure?" The teacher handed him a bow and pointed toward a distant target. "Shoot." The student pulled the string back nervously and released. He missed. Again. Missed. Again. Still missed. Frustrated, the student said, "I keep failing." The old teacher calmly replied, "No, you keep practicing." Failure is not the opposite of success. It is part of the path. The student lowered the bow. "But what if I never hit the target?" The teacher smiled. "That is not fully in your control. What matters is your focus, your discipline, your effort." Stoicism teaches us to focus on what we can control, not the outcome. You cannot control luck, opinions, or results. But you can control your mindset, your actions, and your consistency. As Epictetus said, "Make the best use of what is in your power." Most people are destroyed by fear before they even begin. The Stoic keeps aiming, even after failure, even after setbacks, even after doubt, because discipline is continuing long after motivation disappears. Keep aiming. Modern Stoic mind. The prisoner and the key. A prisoner sat alone inside a dark cell for many years. Every day he complained about the cold walls, the locked door, and the life he believed had trapped him. "I am powerless," he repeated to himself, day after day, year after year. One morning, an old guard walked past the cell and quietly asked, "Have you ever tried opening the door?" The prisoner laughed bitterly. "Why would I? It's locked." The old guard said nothing and walked away. Hours later, the prisoner stood slowly and walked toward the door. With little hope, he pushed it gently. The door opened instantly. The prisoner stared in disbelief. For years, the prison had never truly been locked. Only his mind was. Stoicism teaches that many people live inside prisons they create themselves. Prisons of fear, anger, excuses, doubt, comfort, other people's opinions. And often, the door has been open the entire time. As Epictetus once said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Real freedom does not come from controlling the world around you. It comes from mastering your own thoughts. The moment you stop letting fear control your decisions, the prison begins to disappear. Most limits are imagined long before they are real. Pause. Push the door. Modern Stoic mind. The man and the mud. A man was walking home after a long day when he slipped into deep mud. Angry and embarrassed, he began shouting at the sky. "Why does this always happen to me?" An old man nearby watched quietly before saying, "The mud is not your problem." The man snapped back, "Then what is?" The old man replied, "Your reaction. The mud was temporary, but your anger will stay with you far longer." The man stood silently, and the old man continued, "Life will always throw mud at you. Failure, stress, disappointment, difficult people. You cannot control every situation, but you can control whether you carry the mud with you." That is the Stoic mindset. Not avoiding hardship, but refusing to let hardship control your mind. As Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Most people suffer twice. Once from the problem and again from their reaction to it. The Stoic learns to let go quickly, clean the mud off, keep walking. Modern Stoic mind.